The three wise kings are the animals. The Catalans, they have an extra character. They put him right in the middle of the nativity scene. His name is Caganen. Caganen translates quite literally as Mr. Shit. So they take Mr. Shit and they put him in the middle of the nativity scene. And the whole idea is that we, man and earth, we have a natural connection. Now I'm not really sure why they want to express it quite like this, but they do carry it all the way through to the run up to Christmas and the 24th and the 25th. So normally we would leave some cookies and some milk out for Rudolph, right? The idea is he brings us a few presents the next day. The Catalans, they leave some cookies and some milk and some food out for this little log here. I don't know if you can see him. There's a red nose like Rudolph. It's pretty much the only thing they have in common. His name is Cagatío, which translates as Uncle Shit. So they leave some food out for Uncle Shit, and then on the 20th, on Christmas Day, they're given a stick, basically, and they have to bang the log with a stick, and they have to sing a song as they bang the log, and the song basically calls for the log to give them their Christmas presents, but then they have to go into another room. While they're in another room, the whole idea is that the digestive juices start to do their thing. The stomach muscles of the log, they start to churn. And about an hour later, they come back into the room, and lo and behold, I don't know if you can see the log in the corner here, out poop the presents on Christmas morning. So the Catalan children, they get their presents from a pooping log. It's not Christmas, but seeing as it's on our way, I figured I should share that with you. When you come around the corner, you will see the whole of the Barca football team. Ultimately, they're really busy. It's much nicer because Seville is actually a really ugly name anyway. I hate my parents for it, but anyway. I'm from Dublin in Ireland, but I was born here. My parents, they were hippieing around Europe at the time, and in the middle of that, I was born. We stayed here till I was 4. Then we moved back to Ireland where I grew up, and 10 years ago I came back to Spain because I wanted to see where I came from. And definitely it all made sense. I came full circle. Barcelona is my city. I love this city, and my job for today is to give you guys an overview. Okay, so I'm not going to take you to the Sagrada Familia. That is a separate tour. We can talk about it later if you want. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the whole of the old quarter, the old Gothic quarter. I'm going to take you down the little windy streets. I'm going to take you to squares that you would not find if I didn't bring them to you, okay? A couple of things before we get started. First of all, we're actually a pretty big group, so the streets are narrow, so whenever you see me kind of just do this, it means let's gather around, let's make a little arc, because we have to respect that there are other people walking the streets as well, there are other groups as well. Secondly, unfortunately, we have a pickpocket problem in Barcelona. I'm sure you've all been told this in your hotels, in your hostels already, but I just want to remind you again, be very aware, keep your hands on your purses. General rule of thumb, if someone feels too close to you, they are too close to you, okay? They already have their hand in your pocket, so just beware of your personal space. Ask questions. I have a lot of information in here I cannot tell you in 2.5 hours, so if you need anything filled in, if you want any extra information, feel free to approach me. If I don't know the answer, I'll check it out that evening and send you the answer by email, okay? But I should know the answer. The other thing is, if you do need to leave early, please, that's fine, but please do let me know. Otherwise, we're waiting for you at the next stop, and it's just not fair on the rest of the group. Okay? Finally, this is a free tour. Who knows how a free tour works? Who's done a free tour before? Okay, I'd say just over half of you. For those who don't, let me explain. The whole idea of a free tour is that I volunteer my time today. You are my bosses today. I don't get paid for this. So at the end of the tour, you decide how much you think the tour is worth. And you can pay me whatever you think it was worth. And of course, I'll be very grateful for whatever it is that you want to pay. Okay, so we ready to get started? Does anyone know where we are?
Gothic.
Barcelona, well done. More specifically, where are we?
Gothic Quarter.
Gothic Quarter, great. Let's go right in. We're in the Plaza del Rey. That means the Square of the King. Really bright ones of you would have seen that on a sign over there, but anyway. The Square of the King is a really good place to start because in the medieval times in Barcelona, this was the center of everything. Absolutely everything happened from this square, and every single one of these buildings around us, they each have a strange little story. One of them involves a dead man's feet, one of them involves a pair of breasts, one of them involves a famous explorer, and one of them involves a hanging goat. So let me put all of these things together. Let's get started. I'll go over here. Anyone guess what this is? A church. Close. This is a church. This behind me is actually the royal palace. So the kings and the queens, they would stay in this royal palace in the medieval times. But actually it's most famous not for the kings and the queens, for an explorer who came here. We're at the end of the 1400s. We have a young explorer, he says, I'm going to have this great idea. I'm going to go off, I'm going to discover the Indies, I'm going to bring back spices and riches and slaves and everything that everybody wanted in the Middle Ages. What was his name? Columbus, exactly. He comes up here and he asks for funding for this trip, and the Catholic kings Isabel and Ferdinand, they turn him down. He asks again and they turn him down, and he asks again and they give him a salary for a year and they just say, go away. He goes away and he spends every single penny of that salary on lobbying them to fund his trip. And he goes off and of course he discovers the Indies, what he thinks is the Indies, it's really the Americas. And on these steps here, he made his triumphant return. And he was greeted as the hero that he really thought he was. He was given all sorts of titles, all sorts of rewards, all sorts of riches. But what nobody talks about are two other things that he brought back. He didn't bring back only riches and spices and money. He also brought back one thing that is very, very important to me as an Irish person. He brought back the potato. Nobody knew what to do with the potato in the beginning. They would kick it around, they'd play ball with it. They really had no idea what this thing was until someone had the bright idea, let's boil it. And they tasted it and then they realized that they could eat with it, and that is why I'm alive today. The second thing he brought back was syphilis. He died of syphilis, the kings died of syphilis, and he spread syphilis to the whole of Europe. But nobody talks about that, it's not nearly as interesting. Now, attached to the royal palace over here, we have the royal chapel. So yes, this is a church. And this chapel is dedicated to a young Christian martyr. Her name was Agatha. And Agatha, she wouldn't bow to the Roman gods when the Romans were in Barcelona. The Romans, they got very angry with her and they decided they would punish her. So what they did was they sliced off her breasts. They made her walk with her breasts on a silver platter all the way through this square and all the way through Barcelona. It was horrific. It was horrific what these Christian martyrs had to go through. But she later became patron saint to the bread makers. Any idea why she might become patron saint to the bread makers?
They look like loaves?
Exactly! They look like loaves of bread. It's as simple as that. These were simple people. And a lot of people say, how come the bread makers, they were saint attached to a royal chapel? They weren't important people. Well, this square is where you would come to pay your taxes. The bread makers, they didn't have a lot of money, so they couldn't pay in money. So they came with barrels and barrels of flour. With all of that flour, they brought their way, their saint's way into this royal chapel here. Now, you didn't just come to this square to pay your taxes. You also came to this square to be executed. Everything happened in this square, I told you. If you let me just come down, I'll explain that to you. Hold on. See the little house in the corner there? That tiny little house is the executioner's house. And the executioner, he had a particular role in medieval Barcelona. First of all, he was really lucky because he had a job and he had a house. This was rare in medieval times, but he was a miserable man. He was not a happy man because whenever he came out into public, he had to have a potato sack over his head, and he wasn't even allowed to meet the tailor, so he didn't wear any clothes. He just wore the rest of the potato sack as his clothing because they wanted to keep his identity secret so that, number one, he couldn't be bribed not to kill whoever he had to kill, and number two, he wouldn't be murdered himself for having killed somebody. So even though he had a house and he had a job, he was miserable, and he petitioned and he said, look, this is crazy. I want to wear some clothes, some normal clothes, and I want to have some friends. And finally they allowed the tailor to come to his house, and the tailor did him up in a very, very nice finery. And in this square here, he made his grand entrance into society again, but he still didn't have many friends because he would make a little bit of an income on the side. He would sell the bones of the people that he had killed. Why would he sell the bones of the people that he killed? Because they were superstitious people in the medieval times. They thought these were good luck trinkets. They thought they would ward off evil spirits. especially the feet of a dead man. So if you took the feet of a dead man and you put them in front of your house, your front door, no thief would dare to come in. So it was an alarm system. It would ward off thieves. So he still had no friends and he was still miserable. Attached to the executioner's house over there, this building right behind me, this is the History of the City Museum. And if I was going to recommend any museum in the whole of Barcelona to go and see, I would recommend this one. Because for €6 you get access to everything, literally every single one of these buildings, and not only that, but also what's underneath us. What's underneath us is the whole of the Roman city of Barcelona. So you get a really amazing idea of how Barcelona is a city that is built in layers. It's blended seamlessly one era into the other era, and we're going to walk through all those different eras. Actually, it's only 3, but still. We're going to walk through those 3 eras over the next 2.5 hours. The last thing I want to show you in this square is this tower over here. Can you see it from this angle?
Yes.
If you want it over here, maybe.
Okay.
King Martin's Tower. It's attached to the Palau de la Lloctinent. This is the Viceroy's palace. So the kings and queens, their highest representatives, they could stay here. But King Martin up here, he was the last descendant in the Catalan bloodline before the bloodline ran out. And he died in a very strange way. He wasn't very glorious for the Catalan crown, but he was a glutton. He liked to eat a lot of food, and he was feasting on a goose. And he got bored. He called for his jester, and he was angry because his jester was late. His jester came running in, saying, "God, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm late, I got held up." There was a goat hanging by its neck from a fig tree, as if it had been punished for eating all the figs on that tree. And the jester thought this was a very serious matter, but for some reason, the king thought this was the funniest thing that he had ever heard, and he started to break into laughter. And he laughed more and more and more until he choked on his goose and he died. And that was the end of the Catalan bloodline. So that's the end of this square I'm going to show you here. We're going to make our way through here towards the cathedral, and then I'm going to tell you how Barcelona was founded. Okay, so we'll go through. Here, I've got you here because I want to tell you what we're going to pass by as we go by here, because the music's very loud over there. As we go by, I'm going to stop, I'm going to point up, and you're going to see a figure on a pillar of a very hairy man. His name is Wilfred the Hairy. He's the founder of Barcelona, technically, romantically, legendarily. So I'm going to tell you how he founded Barcelona. When the early French kings were in Barcelona, I'll tell you later how this happened. At one point they decided to appoint a count, and this was Wilfred the Hairy. And this count, he was very close to his king, Charles II. Charles II was actually bald, so he was called Charles the Bald, one of those ironies of history. But one day, Hairy Willy was out defending his king, and he was severely wounded, and he's lying there and he's bleeding all over the place, and Charles comes over to see how he is, and he looks down and he dipped his hand into Wilfred's bloody wound, and he takes his golden shield and he runs his 4 fingers across Wilfred's golden shield, because he saw that his shield had no emblem. He wanted to give it an emblem. With that he created 4 red stripes on a yellow background. What did he create?
Flag.
The Catalan flag, exactly. You're going to see that flag everywhere, all over Barcelona, because the Catalans are very proud of being Catalan. But sometimes you're going to see it, I don't know if you guys have already seen it, with a triangle and a star. Have you already seen that?
Yeah.
Any idea what that's about?
Independence.
Exactly. These guys, they want to be separate from Spain. There's a big independence movement at the moment. It's a huge issue, and I'll tell you about that later on in the tour. But if you're wondering why that's different, that's what it is. And you might notice that it looks kind of similar to Central American flags, maybe a Cuban flag, an Ecuadorian flag. They do that on purpose. They're playing with the idea that Catalonia is just another colony of Spain. So they're playing with the colours as well as the symbology. Okay, so we're going to go by. I'll quietly point out Wilfred the Hairy, and if you want to take your pictures, that's pretty much the only picture you're going to get of the founder of the Catalan flag. So quietly do that.
A quale Andrea? Peloso. Bastardo.
Barcelona. Why am I showing you the side of the Cathedral of Barcelona? Because I want to show you the stamp of workmen from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This cathedral took over 200 years to build, and if you count putting on the facade, it's over 600 years to build. And the way the builders got paid, they would lay their brick and they had to stamp their brick. Obviously they couldn't read or write, so they had to stamp their brick and then they were supposed to turn it to the inside. But a few of the builders made a mistake. And I think this mistake is really interesting because we get to see the stamp of workmen from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So if you look carefully, see this little sign here? This guy would have been fired. He would have been completely kicked off because this is a huge mistake. But he actually made loads of mistakes. And if you go along with the you're wondering what they are, that's what they are. So he got fired big time. Or he knew I would be standing here hundreds of years from now.
It's beautiful.
What do you think of this cathedral?
Yeah, very elaborate.
Because people are divided. So a lot of people think it's ugly as hell. Well, because the front of it isn't Gothic at all. The front of it is neo-Gothic, so it's 19th century. And they think they just copied what Gothic was, and it looks kind of plastic compared to the rest of it. I like it. I don't think it's all so bad. This church, it's dedicated to a young Christian martyr, another young Christian martyr. Her name was Santa Eulalia. And she was a particularly stubborn 13-year-old girl. She wouldn't bow to the Roman gods no matter what the Romans said. And the Romans, they got angrier and angrier and angrier with her till they got to the point where they invented 13 tortures for her 13 years. And the whole idea was to give her 13 chances to change her mind. But she never changed her mind, and she survived all of the tortures. And they were horrific. In one of them, they put her in a barrel with a whole load of broken glass and broken knives. They put a lid on the barrel, and then they rolled her down a hill 13 different times. We're actually going to pass by the street where they did that. And she got out, and she was bruised all over the place, and she's bleeding, but she survived. And she still didn't change her mind. In another one, they crucified her. They nailed her to a cross, naked, because they wanted to shame her, because she was only 13. But miraculously on that day in Barcelona, it snowed. Never snows in Barcelona. It snowed, and her nakedness was covered up, and she survived the crucifixion. They got really angry. They chopped off her head, and she survived. No, she didn't. She didn't survive. But they say that a dove flew out of her neck, and from that moment on, she became a very holy, very important Christian martyr here in Barcelona, and she became one of 2 female patron saints in the city. They got her body, they put it back together, they put it in a casket, and they buried it in this church here. So if you do go into the cathedral, you will see her coffin there, and they say that her body inside the coffin is perfectly preserved. But there's no human who's good enough or holy enough to be allowed to take a look. About 100 years ago, one bishop, he did try, he opened the lid, he took a little peek, and he was struck down blind. So don't do it, okay? Now she's one of 2 female patron saints. The other one, her name is Mercè. And on the day of La Mercè, Mercè got rid of a whole load of locusts. Her story's not very interesting. She just got rid of locusts. But on her day, on the 24th of September, traditionally in Barcelona, it rains. They say it's raining because Santa Eulalia is throwing a tantrum. Because for every other day of the year, she has the attention of the people of Barcelona. She's 13, remember, okay? She has the attention of the people of Barcelona, but for that one day, they're looking to this other girl, and she's crying. So the rain that falls on that day, they're the tears of Santa Eulalia. This church, and in fact, churches and things in Barcelona in general, they tend to close randomly for no reason, and they also tend to charge in randomly for no particular reason. I've looked for a system to try and share with you guys, and I just can't find it. So my recommendation is to just, if you want to go into any of these buildings, go in the morning before 12 o'clock. It's pretty much the only time they're going to be free, and they're probably going to be open. That's my recommendation definitely for churches in Barcelona. Now what I'm going to do is take you around the corner, and I'm going to show you a little bit of modernism. You guys know what modernism is? I'll give you an overview. An artistic movement that happened in Barcelona around the end of the 1800s, only for about 30 years until about 1910. And what you have here is that the Catalans, after years and years and decades and centuries of oppression and suppression, suddenly they were allowed to express themselves, and they wanted to show off that they were proud Catalans, that they were talented Catalans, and they wanted to basically express this in any way that they could. So you have all the artists, all the architects, all coming out to show this off. Now this happened around about the same time as other artistic movements in Europe, like Art Nouveau in France. So a lot of the things that you see in modernism in Barcelona is quite similar. For example, they take a lot of their influences from nature, so you always see references to nature. You always see curved lines rather than strict straight lines like we know from architecture today. And at the same time, you had this very new upper rich class for the first time in Catalonia who wanted to show off that they were rich and that they were Catalan. So these artists and architects and these rich people, they came together, and this allowed modernism to burst into the movement that it became. And it really is the defining face of Barcelona. If you go up Passeig de Gràcia in the modern part of the city, you'll get all these crazy houses. And effectively what these houses are is one rich family showing off, look how much money I have, look what architect I can contract, look what a crazy house I can build. And the next family saying, oh yeah, you think that's good, wait till you see what I can do. And this competition goes all the way up the street. It's fascinating to see. Now the lawyers, when they took over this building, around about the end of the 1800s as well, this was the Lawyers Association. Now it houses the archives of the city, but at the time it was the Lawyers Association, and they wanted a little piece of this action. They contacted a guy called Dominique Muntaner, one of the main modernist architects, to design this for them. Now what they didn't know was that he was going to have a little bit of fun with them. He was going to poke some criticism their way. So let me explain. Like all things modernist, it's absolutely filled with symbolism, and there's always a story behind these buildings. First of all, he starts very traditionally, very safe. We have the crown, we have the Catalan flag over here, we have the flag of St. George, St. Jordi, the patron saint of Catalonia here. We have the scales, the traditional symbol of the law. Then we have some sweeping swallows. The sweeping swallows, they represent how quick and efficient the law can be. So we're still pretty complimentary, still pretty positive. But then he gets critical. We have here a creeping vine. The creeping vine represents the roundabout path, the not straightforward way that the law can take. And then he ends on a turtle. And the turtle represents how slow and plodding and never-ending, but above all, how boring the law can be. And when the lawyers realized the whole city's laughing at us, because the city knew what Dominique Muntaner was doing, they convened a meeting very, very quickly. They weren't known for their sense of humor. And they said, what do we do? Do we get rid of this in anger? Or can we take the higher ground and smile at ourselves and decide to keep it? And luckily they decided they would have a sense of humor, and they decided to keep it. And that's why we have a tiny little slice of modernism right in the middle of the Gothic here. Now, if you look at this turtle, you'll see that it's kind of eroded in the top up here. That's because people rub it as they walk by, and they rub it because a legend has formed around this turtle. If you rub it as you walk by, you will enter a period of good luck in your life. So, I invite you to come this way. You can rub it as you walk by.
Perché? Ah. Sì. Sempre che lo vogliono
Barcino.
Yeah. No. Look carefully.
Barcino.
Barcino, exactly. Anyone know what Barcino is? It's not the first one, but it's the Roman one, which is good enough. I'm not going to go way back to the beginning because we'd be here for 3 hours if I did that. Let's start with the Romans. The Romans, they arrived in Barcelona in about 15 BC. And what they found here was a tiny little fishing village. Only about 1,000 people lived here. But they had a base just down the road in Tarragona, and Barcelona had a really good natural harbour. So they decided, let's set up another base here. It's a good place to start. Hi guys! I'm starting when the Romans arrived in Barcelona. Do you want to just come around? So they decided to set up base, and they set up base, and this base quickly became bigger and bigger, and it became the most important base in the whole region. Now the problem with that is that after a while, after about 500 years in Barcelona, after bringing modernity to the city, after bringing the Latin language, which will become Spanish and will become Catalan here in Catalonia, to the city, Barcelona started attracting not only the good but also the bad. And coming out over the mountains, looking down into the valley, have you seen, do you guys know Barcelona's in a valley? Came these massive, big Germanic barbarians. They looked down and they saw things that they wanted, and they swept into the city, started destroying things, taking things. The Romans, they built their walls higher, trying to defend themselves, but we're coming to the end of the Roman Empire, and they realized we haven't got a chance. There's no way that we can beat these guys. What will we do? We said, let's talk to them. Let's try and cut a deal. They said, okay, you put us in charge of the tribes who've already taken over. If you do that, we'll become your allies and we'll convert to Christianity. And they agreed to do this. And out of this agreement came a ruling class of elite called the Visigoths. And the Visigoths, they ruled for about 200 years in Barcelona from above, and the people underneath had very little say in what was going on. And they stayed here until the Moors came. Then the Moors came, and they absorbed Spain in the 8th century into a big Islamic empire called Al-Andalus. And if you go down to the south of Spain, the whole name Andalusia comes from this Islamic empire. But if you go around Barcelona and Catalonia, you don't see a lot of Islamic influence because they only lasted here for about 80 to 90 years. What happened? The French came down under Charlemagne and they kicked the Moors out, and then the French took over. And this fight between the French and the Moors, there was a buffer zone in the middle, and that buffer zone was Catalonia. That's how Catalonia emerged as a region of its own. In the early years in Catalonia, this whole region was ruled, the whole of Spain actually, was ruled by the early French kings. And this is when we had the whole story with how they decided to appoint a count, Wilfred the Hairy. Wilfred the Hairy, on his deathbed, decided, I don't want the French ruling us anymore. They're not Catalans, they're French. He broke from the French. And from that moment on, Catalonia was ruled by its own kings. And the title became hereditary. Now, at that time, Spain was not just one kingdom, one country the way it is today. It was a whole load of different kingdoms, a whole load of different kings. And that's why the palace that I showed you in there doesn't look all that spectacular. It looks quite small because it was just one kingdom amongst many. And the two biggest were Castile, with Madrid as its capital, and Aragon, which absorbed Catalonia into it, with Barcelona as its capital. Castile, they were busy fighting off the Moors, taking over the south of Spain, so Catalonia, they could look to the Mediterranean. What they saw in the Mediterranean was the possibility of their own empire. So they conquered and took over Sardinia, Sicily, Ibiza, Menorca, Mallorca, all those party islands that you guys know. They had an amazing golden period during this time, and unfortunately there was war after war. Eventually the bloodline ran out with our friend King Martin over there, and they had to give the crown to a guy from Castile. With this, Castile and Aragon, Barcelona and Catalonia all merged and became one big kingdom. Madrid grew, became the capital, and this was the beginning of Spain as you guys know it today. And this was the beginning of Catalonia sinking in importance, and always, again and again in history, choosing the wrong side. And you're going to see that as we go on. Well done, guys. 1 of 3 history lessons over, okay? I'm going to take you to a lighter thing now. We're going to go down. Get out to me? Yeah. It seems so obvious, right? Yes, these funny little drawings behind me. These are the only public work of Picasso in the whole of the city. So This is the only free Picasso you're going to see in the city of Barcelona. Actually, there's another one, but I'll tell you later about that. And actually, he didn't even put these here himself, because as long as there was fascist rule in Spain, he refused to set foot in the country. So what he did was he sat in a cafe in Paris and he doodled these designs on a little napkin. He sent them in the post to his friend, a sculptor who was living in Barcelona at the time, and his friend put them up here. And of course his friend gets no credit whatsoever for that, because this is known as a Picasso. But it is testament to the power of Picasso as an artist that General Franco, under fascist rule, allowed this to stay up, because what he's doing here is celebrating all things Catalan. And this was forbidden under a fascist dictatorship, to express yourself as anything other than Spanish. So on the one on the side, what we have is the dancing children. So these are children dancing and celebrating and just expressing themselves. They're happy Catalan children. What we have at the front are two really Catalan traditions. First of all, we have these two big giants. These two big giants, and whenever there's a festivity, they bring out massive, big papier-mâché giants, and they just kind of walk them around the streets of Barcelona. They're held by some guy on stilts in the middle, and they kind of do this, and they look really impressive. They don't have any purpose whatsoever, other than the fact that they look really good. The thing between the two giants there is the human towers. Have you guys seen the human towers?
Yeah.
Yeah? They're really impressive. Who's going to be here on Saturday? Anyone going to be here on Saturday? No? Oh, today's Saturday. Wait. Sorry. So today at 7 p.m, if you go to Plaza Sant Jaume up there, they're going to be doing the human towers. So what they do is they get a big base. So the strongest men in this group, it's all different groups from different villages, form what they call a pine. And this is a base, and then at the center of the base they start doing circular towers, literally. One circle of the strongest men, then lighter people, then lighter people. It goes all the way up, about 10 stories high.
I should see that.
It's completely insane. It's all done to a lot of trumpet music and sings and claps and all sorts of fanfare. And at the very last minute what they do is they get a child from the village. The child has to climb up to the very top of the tower, throw out 4 fingers representing the 4 stripes of the Catalan flag, and then the whole thing dismantles really, really quickly because there's only so much weight you can take on your shoulders. But it's really, really impressive, and I definitely recommend going to see it. It's in Plaza Sant Jaume. We're going to pass by there. It's our last stop before the break, so I'll tell you about it. There's a really cool sculpture as well, showing you how high it goes. Anyway, we're going to go down this street, and I'm going to show you the cartoon street. We're actually on our way to somewhere else, but this is a cool little street for a couple of reasons. First of all, in the olden days, this was the only pedestrian street in the whole of Barcelona. And when I say pedestrian, it means that horses and carts couldn't come down here, not the cars couldn't come down here, because it was just too narrow. It's been widened since, but it was much narrower before that. Also, this is where, in the modernist time, all the artists and architects, they would come here, they'd gather here to get their churros and chocolate. Do you guys know what churros and chocolate is? It's really, really good. So if you want to come here, it's basically very thick chocolate. And you got churros, which is kind of a long donut thing. And you dunk it into the chocolate and you eat it. You got 2 of the best places in the whole Barcelona are on this street. Where Picasso would come, Hemingway would come here for his churros and chocolate. And you got these 2 on this street. The other thing you get on this street is all these little ceramic stories. You get these all over Barcelona, but this is known as the cartoonist street because they would gather kind of here as well to get the churros and chocolate. And what you do here is they would have to tell a story. Either it's something like this with just one picture, or they make a comic strip out of the amount of tiles that is divisible by 4. So it was normally 24 or 48 tiles, and each tile would have a little picture and a little rhyming couplet at the end of the tile. Just like a comic strip, you know, and they'd have to tell some kind of story. And this is every street, well, not every street, but loads of streets in the Gothic in Barcelona. They'll tell the story of their street in this way, and it's really, really beautiful. In this one, at the very, very end of the street, before we go to the next square, you'll see one little example of that, and I'll tell you about that when we get there. I just want to show you this piece of graffiti. Does anyone recognize this painting? This isn't the really famous painting. This is a graffiti of a really famous painting. And this is where I'm going to tell you where you can see some more Picasso for free. if you want to. There's a place in the other part of the Gothic called Els Quatre Gats. It's a bar called the Four Cats, Quatre Gats. And this is where Picasso and Dali and all these people, they would go to this bar to argue about politics and to argue about art and talk about Catalan independence and all these things. And they would doodle little drawings and little thoughts and little things like that while they were in that bar. And all of those are framed and put on the wall all around this bar. And you can go there for lunch. I think lunch is about €12 or something, maybe €15. And for your €15 lunch, you get your menu that is designed by Picasso himself. And you get, I think, 5 Picassos up along the wall and then all sorts of other paintings as well. And you get a massive mural of this painting here. This is one of the most famous paintings in the whole of Barcelona. This represents the whole of the modernist movement. And what we have here are 2 of the main guys who set up the bar. Hola. ¿Qué tal?
You said 3 cats or 4 cats?
4 cats. 4 cats. Quatre gats in Catalan. And if you... This is one of the guys, and he's always paints himself. This is the guy who painted. He always paints himself down like this with a pipe in his mouth because he thought he was the one who has to always put in the work and put all the work into it. And his partner over here, he's always looking around and talking to all the stars. He didn't make any kind of effort into it, and that's what that represents. But it's a beautiful painting. It's a really cool little bar in a beautiful building. I definitely recommend going. To you guys, Quatre Gats.
So you're going to just drink to eat?
If you go at lunchtime, they'll say, look, if you go in the morning, I'm sure you can take a coffee, just have a coffee and a croissant or something like that. They're really friendly. You know, they're happy to answer questions, and it's in a modernist building itself, so the building itself is interesting. And the shoemaker wants him to continue in the tradition of what the father does, and he should stay in the same business, be commonsensical, make money, but he wants to be an artist. And the father says, no, of course you can't be an artist, that's crazy. And the whole story is them having this big argument. And then at the end of it, the father is reconciled to the fact that his son wants to be an artist. He allows him to be an artist, and of course he becomes a successful artist. So the whole point of this little story is the old Catalunya sort of coming into the new Catalunya, and they don't have to be at odds with each other, that they can blend and get on with each other. That's the whole idea with this little comic here every day. Also in Barcelona, unfortunately, I don't know if you noticed this, even though this is peak season for the people, half the restaurants just closed for August. It's a really Spanish thing, because it's hot and they just don't want to be here. So a lot of the places that I could normally recommend you to are just closed until September. But anyway, we're in Plaza del Pi here, which means Square of the Pine Tree. Any idea why this is called Square of the Pine Tree? Because there's a pine tree here. But this is not a random pine tree. This is a very important pine tree, because this church behind me here would not exist without this pine tree. When the Catalans, when they were fighting the Moors, one soldier climbed to the top of the pine tree and he was looking out for the enemy, and when he was up there he saw a vision of the Virgin Mary. And he saw this as a sign, of course, that they were going to win the battle. And he said, if we win the battle, I will build a small chapel in honor of the Virgin Mary. Of course, they did win the battle. He built a small chapel, which in the 5th century became a bigger church, in the 10th century, a bigger church again, and then in the 14th century, this beautiful church here is built. This is Santa Maria del Pi, St. Mary of the Pine Tree. And this is a really nice example of Catalan Gothic architecture, which is very different from traditional Gothic architecture. So if you think back to the cathedral, think of the arches in the cathedral. They go up narrowly like this, very, very, very narrow. And when you go inside a traditional Gothic church, the feeling is that it's very constrained. It's almost claustrophobic. They're pointing up towards God, but the Catalans, they took that arch and they widened it like this. And they did this because they wanted to save on wood, basically, for their boats and their houses. But the effect is very beautiful. The effect is that when you go inside any one of these buildings, I can't take you in this one, but hopefully there'll be another one along the way I can take you in. The feeling is always that it seems much, much bigger and more spacious on the inside than it looks like on the outside. It's an optical illusion, but there's a lovely feeling of expansion when you go in. Now, the Catalans, they like to think that their architecture reflects their character. They have a word, the word is seni, and it basically means not that exciting from the outside, maybe even a bit square looking from the outside, but very beautiful on the inside, and most importantly, very intelligently designed, because the Catalans, they think they're the brains of Spain. Now, unfortunately, another very Catalan thing is that they're also the penny pinchers of Spain. I would normally take you in here now to show you some of these big gigantes, these giants that I was telling you about, but they've recently started charging for that, so I can't do that. But if you are interested in them, you can go in there. I think for €1, the lights will shine up for all of about 20 seconds. You can quickly take a picture and then they close it again. It's really annoying. So instead, what I'm going to do is give you your second history lesson. Bear with me. Gather round. It's important. I want you to imagine, what is it like living in Catalonia in the 1700s? It's not a lot of fun living here in the 1700s because you're attached to Madrid and you have to do whatever Madrid tells you to do, even though you don't feel Spanish. And that includes going on all of Madrid's wars. Madrid at this time was in the middle of a big, long 30-year war with France, and they forced all the people in Catalonia to take part in a war, to house and to feed Castilian soldiers, even though they didn't feel it had anything to do with them. And it got to the point where the Catalans had had enough, and they rose up, and they had their own war called the Reapers' War, and this was a war of rebellion. And out of this war, they invented a national anthem called El Segadors, the Reapers. The whole idea is we are different, we're separate, not just culturally. We should strive to be politically separate as well as just culturally separate. And this is what they decided to do. So what they decided, let's take the other side. Let's fight on the French side instead. What happens when the Catalans take a side in history? What did I tell you? The beginning. They choose the wrong side, always. They fought for 10 long years on the side of the French. The French lost. French went home, completely abandoned Catalonia, and Catalonia was left to the fury of Madrid. Madrid took away all of their freedoms. The flags, they had to come down. The Catalan language was forbidden. So 50 years later, when they had the chance to get their revenge on Spain for taking all their freedoms away and on France for having abandoned them, they jumped at this chance. This is the Spanish War of Succession. What we have here is the last in the Spanish line. They could not produce an heir because basically the last king, he was an inbreed. He was really, really strange. He was deformed. He was very eccentric. He was not a nice man, and he was impotent. So he couldn't produce an heir. So he promises the crown to the grandson of the French king. And here we create a situation where Spain and France, they might become one big country. If they were to become one big country, that would be a southern European superpower. And the north of Europe, they did not like this idea at all. Austria very quickly laid claim to the crown. They were backed by England and they were backed by the Netherlands. And the Catalans, just because they hated France and Spain, backed this side as well. What happens when the Catalans? They chose the wrong side. The Spanish War of Succession was a pan-European mess of a war. Thousands died. It all just fizzled out. In the end, everybody went home. And Barcelona fought for 13 really long months in a desperate attempt to defend itself from Madrid. But on the 11th of September, 1714, it suffered a crushing defeat. And Madrid was pissed this time, really, really angry. 11th of September is Catalan National Day. A lot of people say, why did they choose a national day of crushing defeat? And they say, well, it was our lowest point, and from our lowest point we can only grow. Nice way to look at it. But Madrid this time not only took away all their freedoms, they built a wall all the way around the city of Barcelona, effectively creating a prison of the city. And no one would ever take that wall down for the next 150 years because they saw this as giving the Catalans what they wanted. So what do you have? You have a population that's growing and growing, but it has nowhere to spread to. So what happens? Disease breaks out. The plague came again and again and again. By the middle of the 1800s, if you were rich in Barcelona, you'll be lucky to reach the grand old age of about 39 years of age. If you were poor, you probably wouldn't make it to 19 years of age. And it got to the point where people started pulling those walls down with their own hands. They were desperate. And finally, the government said, okay, this is a practical problem. We're just going to have to take them down. They took the walls down and the city could expand. So when you look at your maps, you see the Gothic part is all these squiggly streets that we're walking around, but then you see a grid system at the top of your map, right? It looks like New York or Paris. And this is called the Eixample, or example, it looks like. This just means expansion. That's all it means. And that's how the city could expand. So that's how you get the new part and the old part, Barcelona. Okay? Well done, guys. Second history lesson over. We're going to go to the Jewish quarter. And I'm going to bring my voice down a little bit because the neighbours, they have taken to throwing water out their windows and drenching our groups. So because we're annoying them speaking into their kitchens. So can you all hear me at this tone if I speak like this? Yeah? Yeah. Originally in the Jewish quarter there was a gate just where we turned left here. And that gate was the entrance into the Jewish quarter. And of course the Jewish quarter in medieval Barcelona was not just a Jewish quarter, it was a ghetto. So all the Jews would be rounded up and they'd be put inside this ghetto, and at the end of the day the door would be closed and they weren't allowed back out until the next day. So they didn't have a lot of freedoms, the Jews in Barcelona, but actually in the context of medieval Europe, where every city had their Jewish quarter, the Jews of Barcelona had more freedoms than most, for the simple reason that they made up a huge percentage of the population of Barcelona. About 20%, 15 to 20% of the population of Barcelona was Jewish. Which is crazy when you think that today only about between 4,000 and 7,000 Jews live in Barcelona. And most of them are down at the beach, having drunk. Now the Jewish quarter here was lost for a long time. And there had been a whole series of earthquakes. And in the 1980s they decided they wanted to try and find it. And the way they found it was to follow the old taxman's route all the way into this neighbourhood here. And they knew more or less it was in here, but they didn't know where. And what they found was this street that we're going to go down next. And on this street they found a building that was very different from the other buildings. It was kind of leaning in like this. And the windows and the doors were facing slightly differently from the others, and they realized they were facing towards Jerusalem, which means that this would have been the main synagogue of the area. And if this was the main synagogue, then they know that this was the main street. So when we're going down that main street, I want you to try and imagine 20% of Barcelona stuffed inside this main street, and you get a feeling of how absolutely cramped it really was. And they got really excited. They said, yes, we found the main synagogue, this is wonderful. One guy, he wanted to buy it. He wanted to turn it into a bar. And he was going to call the bar Bar Mitzvah, which is horrible. But the Jewish community said, no way, over our dead bodies are you doing that? And they got the funds that they could, and they bought it back for themselves. And they've turned it into a cultural centre. There just aren't enough Jews here for it to function as a proper synagogue anymore. But it is the oldest synagogue in Europe, even though it's not functioning anymore. And they're very, very nice in there. If you are interested in the Jewish history of Barcelona, they will explain the whole thing to you for, I think, €2.50, something like that. And you'll go in and you'll see this synagogue. Now, even though it's the main synagogue, it's tiny. Why is it so tiny? And that's because in medieval times in Barcelona, if you wanted to worship anything that wasn't Jewish, that wasn't Christian, you had to make sure that it was built smaller than the smallest Christian building in the city. So they couldn't build a big synagogue. They could only build these series of tiny little synagogues all over Barcelona. Now the Jews, they had a particular role in Barcelona. By law, they were not allowed to make anything with their hands. So they couldn't be a baker, they couldn't be a butcher, any of these jobs that were the top jobs of the time. So they were excluded from all of that. The only thing they had left to offer was their intelligence, right? By law also, it was illegal for a Christian to lend money to another Christian with interest. So what they would do is they would lend to the Jew, and then the Jew would lend to the Christian with interest. And he became a kind of a middleman, kind of a banker. That's kind of traditionally stayed his role right up until modern times. But there is a feeling amongst the Jewish community here that the Catholic kings, Isabel and Ferdinand, at the end of the 1300s, they got rid of all the Jews. They claimed that the Jews were carrying the plague. They said, how come everybody's dying of the plague except the Jews? They're giving us the plague. And the reality was that actually everybody was filthy, dirty and unhygienic, and the Jews, they had to wash so much when they were praying that they were just more hygienic than everybody else. They also claimed that the Jews were a threat to Christianity, and they said to them, either you convert to Christianity, you get out, or we will kill you. So they got rid of the whole of the Jewish community, but the Jews kind of feel that actually none of these were the real reason. The real reason was that they owed the Jews so much money that it was easier to invent these things, get rid of them all, than it was to pay them back. This isn't official history, but there is this feeling amongst the Jewish community here. Okay, so we're going to go by here. I'll quietly point out the synagogue, and I'm not going to say anything. Okay, square in the whole of Barcelona. This is a really special square because I only stumbled upon this square, and honestly, you guys, you would not find it if I didn't bring you here, or if you didn't stumble upon it yourself. It's called Plaza Sant Felip Neri, and I'll start with a little bit of pop culture. Who's seen Vicky Cristina Barcelona? Yeah? You know the lovely fountain, the little square where Javier Bardem and the girls meet for the first time? You remember that? This is this square here. I should also point out that anyone from Barcelona who has seen that film hates it with a passion. They just don't think it represents Barcelona at all. It's a nice brochure, it looks beautiful, but the characters aren't Barcelona. But anyway, one of the things that makes this square so beautiful, I think, is that it's closed in. But it didn't originally, used to be closed in. This whole building over here this is the old Shoemakers Guild, but this was moved stone by stone from the big main street where we met this morning. When they built that street, they wanted to break up the Gothic because it was just getting too full, too packed, and there were all these houses and palaces that they didn't want to just destroy, so they moved them, literally stone by stone, to other parts of the city. And this is one of them. And if you look under the balconies and over the top window, you'll see the symbol of the shoe. Can you see that? Has anyone been to Venice? Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you recognize that symbol? It's all over Venice. It's all over Venice, the symbol of Venice. Next time you go to Venice, look out for it. And again, it's just a reminder this was a Roman city. It's obviously not the Shoemakers Guild anymore. Where is it? Yeah. You see the top balcony? Yeah. See at the top there's a design, and at the bottom of the balcony there's a design. Can you see it? Yeah. It's a shoe museum. That's what happens over history, and it never seems to be open. It's just there. It's a very quiet square. But attached to the Shoemakers Guild over there, we have what was the Copper Beaters Guild over here, and this is now a school. I'm just going to point this out because everybody asks me. That sign at the top does not mean that they're not allowed to play with scissors in that school. Okay, it's against the cuts to education. There are huge cuts to education, and all the schools are getting really active in fighting that. Now, if you're here during the school year, around 11 o'clock, this whole square fills up with little children, and they're all playing. It's a gorgeous sight, but it's also very poignant to the locals because of what happened in this church over here. This is the church of San Felipe Neri, and if you look at the base of this church, you'll see all this damage there. Can you see that? Can anyone guess what that might be from? Stone? Nope, bigger. A bomb. Yeah, this is a fascist bombing. This is 1938, in the middle of the Spanish Civil War. Mussolini flew over Barcelona. He's bombing Barcelona. He bombed this church, knowing full well that taking refuge inside the church were 42 people, and half of them were children. He bombed it anyway, and he killed all the children. He killed all the people. And the people still have that very fresh in their memories in this little neighborhood here. And they have a plaque over here commemorating that. But every now and then you get the locals will come out and they'll hang their own plaque over this plaque over here. And on their own plaque they'll call for an apology from Italy, because Italy never apologized for that. And they feel that they really should. So it's kind of a bittersweet square here. It's very beautiful, but has a dark history. Now, you do need to know about the Spanish Civil War, but don't worry, I'll wait till the end. Okay, so we're going to go around the corner here. And this is where you want to come tonight at 7 p.m. if you want to see those human towers that I was telling you about. Now, if you look through the two buildings here, you see this sculpture. This represents one of the highest human towers that they built, so you get a really nice idea of how high they actually go, these human towers. It's pretty impressive. And it's all done to a lot of music. It definitely recommend it. That would be one stuck in the middle here, which means I'm going to have to do this all. You got really lucky this year, because normally this is confined to all the different villages, and it's competition between villages, but for some reason they're practicing in this square. A few of them, not all of them obviously, are practicing in this square every Saturday at 7 p.m, so it's pure luck. Also, do bear in mind, I did mention that, they randomly just don't do things when they say they're going to do them. So if they're not here, don't blame me. Okay? They came up to me at the beginning of the season, tell people that we're going to be here. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not. Okay, so if they're not, it's not the end of the world.
The drums and everything, like the whole...
They do music, have you heard the Catalan trumpet? Catalan trumpet is a really particular sounding trumpet. It's very high pitched. It's not very nice, but it's fun. And they just all get really excited, and everybody is excited because it's crazy to see, And it's very kind of nerve-wracking as well, because when the child has to go up to the top, you're really scared, you know. And actually, 3 years ago now, one child died. She fell down, she broke her neck. And now they make the children wear helmets, which I don't see how that stops you from breaking your neck. But anyway, it makes people feel safer. And I think this year, one child fell and broke. I think she punctured a lung or something. She's okay, but something happened. So it's dangerous. So you get sounds horrible, but you get the added enjoyment of the fact that it's really dangerous. I don't know if it sounds good, but anyway, so Plaza Sant Jaume. This is the very, very center of Barcelona. So in that tiny little fishing village that I was telling you about, the Romans, they would have built their forum here because this is the cross-section between the main north-south street and the main east-west street. So literally from this point here, the whole of Barcelona grew out into the city that you guys are walking around today. Today, the square houses, the government over here, this is the Generalitat, this is the government of Barcelona, and obviously this has been closed down, opened up, closed down, opened up, depending on when Catalonia has lost and regained its freedoms over history. If you look at the very top, you'll see they're flying the Catalan flag, but they're also flying the Spanish flag because by law they have to fly the Spanish flag. It would be a huge act of treason not to do that, so they can't get away with doing that. If you look at the balcony, you'll see that on the balcony there is a guy on a horse and he's killing a dragon with a sword. Does anyone know who that is?
St. George.
Exactly, St. Jordi, St. George. Now, if you guys are going to go and see any of the modernist buildings up the Passeig de Gràcia, you need to know the story of St. Jordi because he's the heart of Catalan legend and Catalan folklore. He's represented in all the different buildings. So I'm going to tell you a story of St. Jordi. There was a village in Catalonia, and this village was being plagued by a dragon. And every day the dragon came to the edge of the village and said, "I'm hungry, give me something to eat." The villagers, they gave him their cows and their sheep and their animals, all the animals that they had until there were no more animals left to give. And the dragon said, "I'm still hungry, give me one child per day to eat or I will destroy the village." The villagers, they got together with their king and they discussed this situation. They said, "What will we do?" And they realized that they didn't have a choice. They were just going to have to do whatever the dragon said. So on the first day, the king came out and he had a big pot. And in the pot, he had all the names of the children of the village. And he took out the first name. And as he took out the first name, his face went pale. Because the first name he took out was the name of his very own daughter, who of course was the most fair and beautiful in the whole land. She was a good princess and she went out to the edge of the village and she waited for the dragon to come and eat her up, and he approached and he opened his mouth, and just as he was about to eat her up, galloping over the horizon came St. Jordi on a white horse. And he gathered all the way up to the scene and he took the princess, he threw the princess on the back of his horse and he took the dragon with his other hand and he galloped into the center square of the village and he threw the dragon down on the ground. He took his sword and he killed the dragon with his sword. Out of the blood and the corpse of the dragon grew a very beautiful rose bush. Took one rose from this rose bush, he gave it to the princess, and they galloped off into the sunset. And they lived happily ever after. Now the day of Sant Jordi is the 23rd of April. So if you're in Barcelona on the 23rd of April, what you get is the whole of the city absolutely covered in red roses. It's very, very beautiful, and traditionally the boy has to give the girl a red rose. It's kind of like Valentine's Day. They don't really do Valentine's Day here. Here's a really bad joke, but it's nicer than Valentine's Day because it's based on a true story. Anyway, at some point the boys got really annoyed because they were giving red roses and they weren't getting anything in return. So one guy decided, I'm going to merge National Book Day with St. Jordi Day. So actually you don't just get red roses all over the city, you get books all over the city as well, and traditionally the girls, they had to give the boys a book. But then the girls got really annoyed because they were forking out for a book and all they got was a stupid red rose. So now everyone just shares books and red roses. And it's a very, very beautiful day to be in Barcelona, 23rd of April. The other thing that we have in this square is the town hall over here. Again at the top, I don't know if you can see that from here. We have three flags. We have the Catalan flag. We have the Spanish flag. Does anyone recognize the last flag?
Barcelona.
Exactly, the Barcelona flag. Barcelona flag is a mixture of the flag of St. George and the Catalan flag. That's how you recognize it. And this town hall was not originally, this wasn't originally the entrance, this is 19th century entrance. The original entrance was around the other side, they just stuck this one on in the 19th century. Okay, guys, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break. Okay, we're going to go down here, we're about 3/4 of the way through the tour, another half an hour more or less to go. When we're down there, my colleague is going to be down there selling tickets to the other tours. So I'll just give you a brief overview of them, and then if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me or ask my colleague down there. One of them is the Modernism Tour. The Modernism Tour leaves at 2:30 every day, same meeting point. The route that you take depends on your guide, but basically you get a whole overview of the whole of the modernist movement in Barcelona. You go up to Passeig de Gràcia, where you see all those houses, and the rich families were in competition with each other. You learn all about Gaudí, you see the Gaudí houses, and you make your way slowly to the Sagrada Familia, where your guide will explain the whole of the facade of the Sagrada Familia and the whole story of the Sagrada Familia. Now, I would definitely, there's one thing I'd recommend to do in Barcelona, it is to see the Sagrada Familia, whether you do it with us or not, but do get somebody to explain it to you, because you have to take it out of your minds that it's a church. It's a church by coincidence. It's actually just a very strange, interesting building, and you need someone to explain it to you, or you're just not going to understand what the hell you're looking at. This tour is €10 if you're a student, €12 if you're not, but this price does not include the entrance. If you want to go in, you have to pay €17. It's the entrance to the church, and you get with us a skip the line option, so you don't have to stand in line, just go straight in. The other tour that we have is the Tapas Tour. Tapas Tour is a fun tour, okay? Basically, you leaves at 7 o'clock, 7 p.m., same meeting point there, and the whole idea is that you learn about tapas and food, and you go on a kind of a pub crawl as well. Pub crawls are illegal in Barcelona. I don't know why, but they're illegal, so we mix the two into an educational thing about tapas. You all go to one bar together, you share some tapas, you have a few drinks, and then you go from bar to bar to bar. You hear stories about Barcelona, mostly about the food, and then you end up in one bar together. It lasts about 3 hours. Technically, often it goes on to the next morning, depending on the group that you're with. But this one is €14 if you're a student, €16 if you're not. Any other questions, just ask my friend down there. Okay? I'm stopping you here because I want to ask you, do you know what the national animal of Catalonia is? It is the donkey, it's not the bull. Why is it the donkey? Because the donkey is stubborn. The donkey puts his head down, the donkey keeps going until it gets to where it has to go. And it's a very, very sort of emblematic of what the Catalan character is like. Complete opposite to the bull. I don't know why they're hanging the bull. The bull is proud, the bull is strong. This is new, this hanging. I'm not trying to make any statement here. But anyway, I just thought you should know about the donkey. We're going to go continue over. Leave for no particular reason. But this is Santa Maria del Mar. That means St. Mary of the Sea, because we're getting closer and closer to the sea. I don't know if you can sometimes feel a nice breeze. You can feel that we're getting closer to the sea. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you the inside, but I would come back in your time if I were you and go inside, because you do get that feeling of expansion on the inside. And anyone who's going to go to the Sagrada Familia, you'll see where Gaudí got his inspiration. He got his inspiration from these Catalan Gothic buildings, because the pillars, they're very, very narrow in these buildings, and they go up and they kind of branch out like this. They create this feeling of almost being in a forest. When you go into the Sagrada Familia, Gaudí, of course, he took that one step further and he created an interior that is a forest. That's what he wanted to do. So that's what you see in there. Now, this church is a very special, it's probably the most important church in the whole of Barcelona, not because it's a show-off church, or it's a church for the state, or it's a church for Rome, because this church was proudly built by the people, for the people. And if you look on the doors, you'll see these images of these men carrying stones. Can you see those? The guys from this neighborhood, they will go all the way up to Montjuïc, which is the hill on the side of Barcelona, and they take stones and they carry them on their backs all the way down here just to build this church. So it's very much a church of the people, and the whole idea is this church has suffered with us through the centuries. We hold it dear. And this church, in the run-up to the Spanish Civil War, like all churches in Spain, was attacked viciously by the Republicans because they saw the church as siding with the fascists. And it was destroyed on the inside. So when you go inside, you'll see that it's quite bare because they didn't want to refill it. They wanted to keep it bare so that you are reminded of the atrocities of the Red Terror. It was called the Red Terror. What they would do is they killed clergymen wherever they could find them. They killed 7,000 priests just for being priests. They burned down churches. The images you see are very, very horrific. They would decapitate statues of Jesus. They would shoot down statues of the Virgin Mary. They dug up dead nuns, the corpses of dead nuns, and they danced through the streets with the corpses of dead nuns because they wanted to show their contempt for the Catholic Church. Altogether, they killed about 45 to 50,000 people. When Franco came to power, he got his revenge. He killed 200,000 people in what became known as the White Terror. So between the two sides, by the end of the Spanish Civil War, they were exhausted of all of these atrocities, all of this violence. They just didn't want to even think about it anymore. So in their rush to bring democracy back to the country, they swept all of these atrocities under the carpet. So they wanted to forget about them. And that means that there was never any truth and reconciliation movement. Nobody was ever brought to court. Nobody was ever held accountable. So you got people all over Spain whose grandparents and great-grandparents are still disappeared. What does that mean? They're disappeared. It means they were murdered, but they will never know by whom, and they will never know where they're buried. So they'll never get closure on that. So again, this is very fresh on the minds of the people in Spain in general. Now, sadly, I can't take you in, but I'm going to take you around the corner, and I'm going to show you the most important place for Catalan nationalists. I'll tell you a bit about this separatist feeling that's in the city at the moment. So, Las Murallas, which means the mulberry tree cemetery, because the first people who fell defending Barcelona in the big siege of Barcelona in 1714, they're buried under our feet here. And every 11th of September, all people from all over Catalonia, they come here to pay homage to those people who fell defending Barcelona. And 1714 is so burned into the consciousness of the Catalan people that it has even made its way into the football stands. Has anyone seen a Barca game at home? A home game? No? If you go to a Barca game in the home match in the Camp Nou, the minute the clock hits 17:14, all the supporters stand up and they all start shouting out, "Independencia, Independencia!" And the other side always gets a big fright. Obviously, if they're losing, they don't do that. It's just generally if the feeling is good, you know. So this feeling of independence has kind of grown stronger over the years. And what's happened with this place here is that now it's not just a place to come on National Day. It's also a place to come to call for independence, to call for separation from Spain. And the reason is because in 2006 there was a referendum. They wanted to see how many people want to be separate from Spain. Now, not a lot of people turned out to vote. Only about 50% turned out, but of those 50%, 75% voted in favor. And they took this result to Madrid. And Madrid basically said, yeah, whatever. Go home, we really don't care. Call yourselves whatever you want. The only nation that this court recognizes is the nation of Spain. And they thought that would be the end of it. But actually, the Catalans felt, first of all, very insulted. They thought this was disrespectful. And then their feeling of difference actually grew, not was suppressed. And it grew every year stronger until 2 years ago, 1.5 million people all marched to this point here. They paid their respect. They marched all the way down that street where we're going to finish up on now, all the way into the park that is now the Ciutadella, but was originally those walls that were built around the city, and they all called for independence. And next year there's going to be another referendum, if Madrid allows it. Madrid is fighting it. Now, a referendum would have no legal value whatsoever. It's just an opinion poll. It has no legal status, but it would, an overriding majority would sort of force the debate to open. The discussion would have to open. Now, we'll see what happens, but in my personal opinion, I don't think the majority would actually vote in favour of independence. For a couple of reasons. First of all, I think young people right now in Catalonia, they just have bigger problems on their plate. The economy is in such terrible state that they just want a job. They want their degrees to mean something. They want to move ahead in their lives. And last year with the elections, every single politician came out, and in an attempt to take the focus away from the state of the economy, they all held up this independence card. And I think the young people just went, oh, come on, we're not that stupid. Come on, let's focus on the economy. One reason. The second reason is Catalonia and Barcelona, like everywhere else in the world, in the meantime, over the years, has become something different. It's become internationalized, so it's not just about Catalans and Spanish people anymore. There are immigrants here. I am an immigrant. I am neither Spanish nor Catalan, and I personally would not vote in favor of being separate from Spain. I don't think it makes economic sense, and I don't think the immigrant population would either. But I might be wrong, okay? So you might read the paper next year and you go, oh my God, she got it completely wrong. That might happen. But whatever happens, I do think that you need to appreciate where this feeling comes from. They've just had their freedoms taken away again and again over history. So one way of appreciating, showing that you know this, is to show that you know that there's a difference between Catalonia and Spain. One way of showing that you know there's a difference between Catalonia and Spain is to show that you know that there are two languages, Catalan and Spanish. So I'm going to teach you 4 words in Catalan. And I can guarantee you that if you use any one of these words, you're just going to get a smile, okay? People are going to be happy that you are making the effort, that you know that there's a difference, okay? So instead of buenos días in Spanish, in Catalan you say bon dia. Bon dia, you Brazilians, where are they? Easy for you. Instead of adios in Spanish, in Catalan you say adeu. Adeu. Okay, it sounds a bit like adieu in French, a lot of French influence, but you never tell them it sounds like French. Okay, it's a separate language. Instead of por favor, which means please in Spanish, in Catalan you say sisplau. Sisplau, s'il vous plaît.
Like French.
Yes, no. And this one definitely isn't French. Instead of gracias in Spanish, in Catalan, you can say either gracias, which is softer, or merci. So, Spanish, okay? I'm going to take you to a funny little street around the corner and then we're going to finish up just down here. Okay, so here, this is called Calle de las Dames, which means Ladies Street. Because ladies used to gather on this street. But fear not, they were ladies of good repute. They were not prostitutes. They gathered here for a reason. The waterfront, the port, used to come much further up. It used to actually finish here. And the sailors, they would have a superstition. They said, oh God, get me home safely. Please get me home safely. If you do, I will marry the first lady that I lay eyes on. And the ladies here, they knew this. And if you weren't married for some reason, you were too old, you were too ugly, I really don't know, you would gather here and you'd wait for the sailors and they'd get off their boats and they were exhausted. They'd just go with whoever, really. So the whole idea is you come here, you bag yourself a husband and you go home, basically. But the port, it receded over the years, of course it went down further to the coast and the ladies, they stopped gathering here. But I think it's very typical of Barcelona. It's a lovely gesture that they saw fit to name this street after these ladies. You know, they're not kings and queens, but they're just as much the heart of Barcelona as anyone else. And this square here is called Plaza de las Ollas, which means Square of the Big Pot, because this is where the sailors, they get their first meal after all those months at sea. This is where they get their first meal. And today it's just a really good place, again, to come for tapas, to come for menu. Today they're all closed because logically you close in peak season. I don't know why. But they'll open again in September if you happen to be here. We're going to go around the corner where we're going to finish up and I'm going to tell you the lovely story of fascism. Okay, so to the end of the tour, and this will be your last history lesson. Let me just orientate ourselves. We're on the Paseo del Born, so this is kind of the center of the Born area. Paseo del Born just means passageway of the lance. Born is Catalan for lance, and that's because in the medieval times, one guy would sit on a horse over here, one guy would sit on a horse on the other end, and they would gallop towards each other, and somewhere in the middle, one of them would die. So this is where they would have duels. And the little street at the top up there to the right, that's where if you guys are interested in the Picasso Museum, that's where the Picasso Museum is. Over here on the other side, you have the park of the Ciutadella, which is a really good park, definitely worth seeing, and with a very nice fountain. If you're tired after this tour, you want to just sleep, this is a really good place to go and lie in the grass. Now, what I want to do is, if you could just do this, I want to take you. Oh, that's your husband? Yeah. Oh, okay. So, could I over here? Yeah, no problem. I want to tell you the story of how Barcelona won its city back from the fascists when they arrived into the city, and because I think it's really reflective of the sort of think out of the box way of the Barcelona people, and the fact that they're creative and they just use what they have. Now, in order to understand this, you have to understand what was happening in Spain at the time. In 1936, Spain was a country in the middle of an identity crisis. It had lost all of the prestige that it had in the medieval times. All its colonies were pretty much gone. This whole thing of Columbus and all these kings, it was all gone, and they didn't know what it wanted to be. One half of the country wanted to be a very right-wing nationalist union, under God, under king. We have the other half of the country wants to be a republican democracy. And they would fight left, right, with every election until just before 36, a democracy was put in place. Now that sounds great, but unfortunately the right-wingers, they thought this was a disaster for Spain, and they decided that they were going to come up under General Franco and they were going to overthrow the government. They thought they could do this in 3 days because Franco had the support of Hitler, he had the support of Mussolini, and Hitler lent him his Luftwaffe, his airplanes, to fly him into Madrid. Now, what he didn't count on was the fact that big, important cities like Barcelona, like Spain, would fight to the end to defend themselves. And they did win their cities back, Madrid and Barcelona, but they just couldn't win the war. Now, how did Barcelona win its city back? I want you to imagine that General Franco has arrived into the city. He has all of his guns pointed into the city from the port. He's taken up strategic strongholds within the city. He even has a 5th column of snipers inside shooting out at anyone that he thinks is on the Republican side. So the people of Barcelona are left thinking, how the hell do we defend ourselves against our own army? How do you do that? They looked around and they said, fine, we'll just use what we have. What do we have? The city had guns. They went to the government. They said, give us guns. The government armed them. Now they were armed, they needed barricades, right? They needed something to hide behind. Again, they looked around and they said, we'll just scramble together what we can find. The woodworkers, they came out and they built a massive big barricade out of wood. The transport workers and the metal workers, they found all the scrap iron that they could muster together. And the dock workers, they found these big, huge rolls of paper that they could roll out into strategic positions. So now they had arms and they had something to hide behind. What are they missing? They're missing their own army. The National Army's already taken. Again, they looked around, they said, we'll just build our own army. We're going to build an army out of the people. And they did this, and they built an army, but it was an anarchist's army. And this means that there was nobody in charge, technically. There was no officer. An officer could not order a soldier what to do. He had to convince the soldier what to do. There was no salute, there was no uniform. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. But actually, it was thanks to this unit that Barcelona managed to win its city back. How did they do this? They went from stronghold to stronghold to stronghold, and they either won it back through old-fashioned fighting, or, really thinking outside the box, they convinced the guys on the other side that they were on the wrong side and that they should come over to this side. They went up to Plaza Catalunya. There was a big, huge battle in the telecommunications building there, and then they ended up down at the port where there was a big final battle. And with that, they won the city of Barcelona back. Now, this is a glorious victory, but unfortunately, it was short-lived because even though they won the battle, there's no way they could win the war. Franco did have the support of Hitler and Mussolini at a time when fascism was a huge, big movement in Europe. So they lost the war, and all the people who had fought defending Barcelona, they had to run up to France. They had to become refugees in France, and they were put into camps, and a lot of them, they decided they wanted to carry this fight against fascism through to the French resistance. And so actually it was the Spanish soldiers who taught the French how to fight in a resistance, because they had learned it here first. And the Spanish were there in Normandy with the French, and they were there in 44 when Paris was liberated, and the whole time that they were there, they kept saying, please don't forget about Spain. We're still here, please do not forget about Spain. But sadly, the world really did forget about Spain, because they took that fight against fascism only as far as France. Once France was liberated, they decided they could live with a dictator in Spain. And this is Spain's modern tragedy. Franco stayed as dictator until 1975, which is crazy when you think about it. The rest of the world is going through the 60s. They're dancing to the Beatles, sexual liberation. They're having fun, and Spain is still stuck under this old-style fascist dictatorship. But Franco died in 1975, and Spain woke up. And Barcelona, for the first time in I don't know how long, could express itself as the city it really wanted to be. And in the Olympics, in 1992, they could finally show it off. So everything that you're seeing today is thanks to what they brought together for those Olympics. This whole neighborhood, it was run down. There were junkies here. You would not have come down here. It was full of criminals. They've done it up. The beach, you wouldn't have gone down there. There was a film this thick of oil and just dirt on the sea. They cleaned it whole up. All the old Catalan traditions, they brought them back out. So they're super, super proud of this city. I love this city. I hope you guys see it with a bit more perspective now. And of course, I hope you've enjoyed the tour. Thank you very much. Well done for the last long history lesson. Just a couple of things. If you guys have enjoyed the tour, you could do me a really big favor by going to TripAdvisor. Please do mention me by name. Say you enjoyed it, give me 5 stars, and I might win. I don't know what the prize is for the week. It's like a bottle of champagne or something, but I might win it. And that would be great. If you haven't enjoyed the tour, my name is Mary. And finally, this is a free tour. And of course, you guys now decide how much you think it's worth, and I'd be appreciative of whatever it is you want to do. Okay? I can help point you in any direction anyone needs to go.